The morning air was heavy with the kind of damp chill that settles into your bones, the kind that makes you pull your jacket tighter even though it's not quite cold enough to complain. I stood in the driveway, my boots scuffing against the cracked asphalt, staring at the for sale sign stabbed into the lawn like a cheap flag. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its white siding dulled to a sickly gray, the shutters sagging like tired eyelids. 20 years ago, this was the place I called home. 20 years ago, I stood in this exact spot, a battered backpack slung over one shoulder, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and fear as the front door slammed shut behind me. I was 18 then, too proud to beg, too stubborn to apologize for wanting a life my parents couldn't understand now, comma at 38. I wasn't that kid anymore. I was Lucas Reed, the guy who'd clawed his way out of nothing to build a music production company that had indie bands begging for a chance to work with me. I had a penthouse in Midtown, a girlfriend who saw through my bullshit, and a best friend who'd been with me since the days we shared a mattress in a homeless shelter. I didn't need this house. I didn't need the memories it held, the echoes of my father's barking voice or my mother's cold, silent judgment. But when I saw that sign, something in me snapped. Not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. I made the call to the realtor that same afternoon. Cash offer. No inspection. I didn't even haggle Dot. The deal closed in a week, and I didn't tell anyone, not even Ava. I wasn't sure why I kept it to myself. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready to face what real meant. I didn't plan to live here. I didn't want to gut it and flip it for profit. I just wanted to own it, to hold the deed in my hands and know that the place that had once spit me out now belonged to me. That Saturday morning, I was at the house, standing in the empty living room where my father used to sit in his recliner, a beer in one hand, the remote in the other, his eyes narrowing every time I dared to mention music. The air smelled of dust and neglect, the kind of stale scent that clings to a place no one's loved in years. A contractor was outside, muttering about a leaky roof, but I wasn't really listening. I was tracing the ghost of my younger self, the kid who'd sit cross-legged on this very floor, strumming a secondhand guitar, dreaming of a life that felt impossible. I was halfway through a memory, my mother's voice, sharp and final, saying, "You'll regret this, Lucas. You'll end up with nothing," when a knock rattled the front door. It was a soft knock, hesitant, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. I froze, my hand resting on the chipped windowsill. The contractor was still outside, so it wasn't him. Ava was at her yoga class, and Miles was in Nashville scouting a new band. Nobody knew I was here. I crossed the room, my boots echoing on the hardwood, and leaned toward the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. There they were, Edward and Marla Reed, my parents, standing on the porch of the house they'd once owned, the house they'd kicked me out of. Their faces were older, weathered, the lines deeper than I remembered. My father's broad shoulders were stooped now, his hair thin and gray. My mother's lips were pressed tight, her eyes darting nervously toward the street. They looked small, fragile even. Not the towering, unyielding figures of my childhood, but two people who'd been worn down by time, by life. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, my forehead pressed against the cool wood, listening as their muffled voices floated through. "Thought he might be here," my father said, his voice low, almost broken. "We don't have anywhere else. Lost everything," my mother added, her words trembling. "We just need to talk to him." My heart pounded, not with love, not with forgiveness, but with a cold, steady sense of finality. I could feel the weight of every sleepless night I'd spent in a borrowed car, every holiday I'd spent alone, every song I'd written to drown out the ache of their rejection. I could still smell the stale coffee from the gas station where I'd washed my face in a grimy sink, still hear the hum of my guitar as I played for strangers on street corners, telling myself I was enough. I straightened up, took a deep breath, and turned away. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to hear their apologies, if that's what they'd come to offer. I didn't need their excuses or their desperation. I walked back to the living room, grabbed my jacket, and nodded to the contractor as I headed out. The air outside was crisp, the sky a flat, heavy gray. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling to life, and drove away without looking back. That evening, I sat on the porch of my real home, a sleek, modern house perched on a hill overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The city glittered below, a mosaic of lights that felt alive, vibrant, like the life I'd built from nothing. Ava was next to me, her bare feet tucked under her, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with those hazel eyes that always seemed to see more than I wanted her to. You okay? She asked finally, her voice soft, like she was afraid I'd break if she pushed too hard. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the sunset bleeding across the sky, streaks of orange and pink fading into purple. I told her everything: the house, the sign, the knock at the door, the peephole, the silence. My voice was steady, but my hands shook a little, betraying the storm inside me. When I finished, she reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and grounding. You're not cruel, she whispered. You're free. I let those words sink in, let them settle into the cracks of my heart. She was right in a way. I hadn't bought the house to hurt them. I hadn't walked away from that door to make them suffer. I'd done it for me, to close a chapter that had been open too long, to prove to myself that their rejection hadn't defined me. Still, as the last light of the sunset faded, part of me couldn't help but wonder, who would they turn to now that the last door they thought would open had stayed closed? The next morning, I woke up early, the kind of early where the world is still quiet and the air feels like it's holding its breath. Ava was still asleep, her dark hair spilling across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made coffee in the kitchen, the machine gurgling as the smell filled the air. I took my mug to the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below. The skyline was sharp against the dawn, all glass and steel, a testament to ambition, to dreams that refused to die. I thought about my parents again, but not with the same raw edge as yesterday. The anger was still there, buried deep, but it wasn't the loud, burning kind anymore. It was quieter, like a bruise you only notice when you press on it. I sipped my coffee, letting my mind drift to a memory I hadn't touched in years. A summer afternoon when I was maybe 10, sitting on the back porch with my dad. He was different then, or maybe I just saw him differently. He'd been whittling a piece of wood, his hand steady, and he'd looked at me and said, "You gotta be tough, Lucas. The world doesn't owe you anything." I'd nodded, not really understanding, but wanting to make him proud. That was before the fights, before the music became a battleground, before he decided my dreams were a betrayal. I wondered if he ever regretted it, if he ever lay awake at night picturing me out there, alone, wondering if I was okay. Probably not. My father wasn't the type for regret. He was the type for rules, for expectations, for a life mapped out in straight lines. I set my mug down and ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the years. I didn't hate them, not anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I'd spent enough of my life carrying it. But forgiveness? That was a word I wasn't ready for either. Maybe I never would be. By the time Ava woke up, I was already at my desk, scrolling through emails from Miles about a new band he wanted to sign. She padded into the room, still in her pajamas, and leaned against the doorframe, watching me with a small smile. "You're up early," she said, her voice warm, teasing. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "Too much on my mind." She crossed the room and sat on the edge of my desk, her bare legs swinging slightly. "You don't have to carry it alone. I looked at her, at the way her eyes held mine, steady and sure. Ava was like that, gentle but fierce, the kind of person who could call you out without raising her voice. She'd been with me through the late nights, the self-doubt, the moments when I wondered if I'd ever be enough. She'd seen the scars I didn't talk about, the ones that weren't inked on my skin. "I know," I said, reaching for her hand. "I'm trying." And I was. Not just for her, but for me. For the kid I used to be. The one who'd stood in that driveway, scared but stubborn, refusing to let go of his dreams. I owed him that much. I spent the rest of that morning buried in work, trying to drown out the noise in my head. Emails from Miles, contracts to review, a demo track from a band in Athens that had potential but needed polish. The routine was comforting, like slipping into a well-worn jacket. It reminded me that I'd built something real, something that didn't depend on anyone's approval, especially not my parents'. But every now and then, my mind would drift back to that moment at the door, the muffled sound of their voices, the way my mother's eyes had darted toward the street like she was afraid someone might see her there. I wondered what had brought them to that point. What kind of fall had left them so desperate they'd come knocking on a door they'd once slammed in my face? Ava left for a meeting with a client. She was a graphic designer, the kind who could take a band's half baked ideas and turn them into album art that felt like a story. I loved that about her, the way she saw beauty in chaos, the way she could find the heart of something and make it shine. Before she left, she kissed my forehead, her lips lingering just long enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone in this. Call me if you need me, she said, her voice soft but firm, and I nodded, even though I knew I wouldn't. Not yet. By noon, I was restless. The house felt too big, too quiet. The city skyline outside the windows too sharp against the soft gray of the day. I grabbed my keys and drove. No destination in mind, just needing to move. The truck's engine hummed, the radio playing some old Tom Petty song that made me think of late nights in my 20s, driving between gigs with Miles, our laughter loud enough to drown out the uncertainty. I ended up at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with chipped formica tables and waitresses who called you hun without meaning it. I ordered a coffee and a slice of pie I didn't really want, just to have something to do with my hands. The pie sat untouched as I stared out the window, watching cars pass by on the highway. A memory hit me, sharp and unbidden, of a Christmas when I was 16. My parents had thrown a party for their church friends, the house filled with the smell of cinnamon and pine, the clink of glasses, the hum of polite conversation. I'd been upstairs working on a song, my guitar balanced on my knee, when my mother came in without knocking. Her face was tight, her voice low. "Put that away, Lucas. You're embarrassing us." I'd looked at her, stunned, not understanding how a song could be an embarrassment. But I'd put the guitar down because back then, I still thought I could make her proud. Now, sitting in that diner, I realized I'd spent years chasing that approval, even after they'd kicked me out. Every gig, every late night in a studio, every small win. It was all laced with this quiet hope that maybe one day they'd see me, really see me, and say we were wrong. But they never did. And yesterday, when I saw them through to that peephole, I knew they never would. I paid for the coffee and left the pie, driving back into the city as the afternoon light softened. When I got home, Miles was there, sprawled on my couch like he owned the place, a beer in one hand and his phone in the other. He was a big guy, all broad shoulders and easy grins, the kind of person who could make a room feel warmer just by walking into it. We'd met in a shelter when I was 19, both of us scraping by, both of us too stubborn to give up. He'd been the one to convince me to start producing, to take my music beyond street corners and open mics. Now he was my business partner, my brother in every way that mattered. "You look like shit," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Thanks," I muttered, dropping my keys on the counter. "What are you doing here?" "Checking on you," Ava texted me. He set his phone down and gave me a look, the kind that saw right through my defenses. "She said you had a rough day yesterday." I sighed, running a hand over my face. I didn't want to talk about it, but Miles had a way of pulling things out of me like a kid tugging at a loose thread until the whole sweater unraveled. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat across from him, telling him about the house, the sign, the knock at the door. His face stayed neutral, but his eyes darkened when I got to the part about my parents. "Damn," he said when I finished, leaning back and rubbing his jaw. "That's heavy, man. You okay?" I shrugged, staring at the label on my beer bottle. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel something, like closure maybe, but it just feels empty." He nodded, like he understood. And maybe he did. Miles had his own ghosts, parents who'd given up on him long before he'd given up on himself. "You don't owe them anything," he said after a moment. "Not a damn thing." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But knowing something and feeling it are two different things. There was still a part of me, small and stubborn, that wanted to open that door, to hear what they had to say, to see if there was any piece of them left that loved me. But I'd learned a long time ago that wanting something doesn't make it real. Miles stayed for a while, talking about the band in Nashville, about a new studio we were thinking of opening, about anything but the thing we both knew was weighing me down. When he left, the house felt quieter, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of quiet that lets you think, lets you sit with yourself and figure out what comes next. That night, I dreamed of the old house, but not the way it was now. In the dream, it was summer, the grass green and buzzing with cicadas, the air thick with heat. I was a kid again, sitting on the front steps, my guitar in my lap, my fingers clumsy on the strings. My father was there, but he wasn't angry. He was just sitting next to me, listening, his face soft in a way I couldn't remember ever seeing. When I woke up, my chest ached, not with anger, but with a strange, quiet sadness for the family. We could have been Dot. The next few days were a blur of meetings and studio sessions, the kind of chaos that kept me grounded. Ava was there through it all, her presence steady like a lighthouse in a storm. One evening, we went for a walk in Piedmont Park, the air cool, the leaves just starting to turn. We didn't talk about the house or my parents, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to let her in. Dot. As we sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold, I found myself thinking about the future, not the past, about the life I was building, the people who mattered. I thought about Miles, who'd believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. About Ava, who loved me not in spite of my scars, but because of them. And I thought about that kid in the driveway, the one who'd walked away with nothing but a backpack and a dream. I'm okay, I said suddenly, my voice breaking the silence. Ava turned to me, her eyes soft, questioning. I mean it, I said. I'm okay. She smiled, small and knowing, and leaned her head against my shoulder. Good, she whispered. Dot. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Dot. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of routine and reckoning. Work kept me busy, meetings with artists, late nights in the studio, arguments with Miles over which tracks needed more grit and which needed more soul. It was the kind of chaos I thrived in, the kind that reminded me I was alive, that I'd built something worth fighting for. But there was a shadow hanging over it all, a quiet hum of unease that I couldn't shake. Buying the house, seeing my parents through that peephole, it had stirred something in me, like kicking up dust in a room you thought you'd locked shut. Dot Ava noticed it, of course. She had a way of reading me, catching the moments when my smile didn't quite reach my eyes or when I'd stare out the window a little too long. One night, as we were cooking dinner, her chopping vegetables, me stirring a pot of sauce that was probably too salty, she set her knife down and looked at me. The kitchen smelled of garlic and basil, the radio playing some soft jazz that felt like it belonged in a different life. You're still carrying it, she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Her voice was gentle, but it cut through the noise in my head. I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I turned the heat down on the stove, leaning against the counter, my hands gripping the edge. I thought I was done with it, I admitted. I thought buying the house, walking away, I thought that was the end. She stepped closer, her hand resting on my arm, her touch light but steady. Maybe it's not about ending it. Maybe it's about living with it. I looked at her, at the way her eyes held mine, not with pity, but with something deeper, something that made me feel seen. I don't know how to do that, I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. I don't know how to live with something that still hurts. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her knife and went back to chopping, the rhythmic sound filling the space between us. After a moment, she said, You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just don't shut it out. Let it be there. Let it breathe. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, turning back to the sauce. But her words stuck with me like a song you can't stop humming. Let it breathe. I'd spent so long trying to bury the pain, to prove it didn't own me, that I'd forgotten how to feel it without letting it take over. Dot. The next day, I found myself driving back to the old house. I hadn't been there since that Saturday, since the knock at the door. The for sale sign was gone now, replaced by a patch of bare dirt where the grass hadn't yet grown back. I parked in the driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. It looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more like a tired old thing that had seen too many years. I got out and walked inside, the air still heavy with dust and memory. The contractor had fixed the roof, patched the walls, but it was still empty, still hollow. I wandered through the rooms, my boots scuffing against the floor, each step pulling up flashes of the past. The kitchen, where my mother used to stand at the stove, her back stiff, her silence louder than any words. The hallway where I'd once tripped and split my lip. My father telling me to stop crying because men don't make a fuss. The staircase where I'd sit at night, listening to their arguments through the walls, wondering if I was the reason they were so unhappy. Dot. In my old bedroom, I stopped. The walls were bare now, the posters of Nirvana and Springsteen long gone, but I could still see the kid I'd been, sprawled on the bed with a notebook, scribbling lyrics that were more feeling than sense. I remembered the night I'd decided to leave, not because they'd kicked me out yet, but because I knew it was coming. I'd been 17, sitting on this very floor, my guitar in my lap, when my father had stormed in, his face red, his voice booming. You think you're special, Lucas? You think you're going to be some rock star? You're throwing your life away, and I won't watch it. I'd looked at him, my hands shaking, and said, Then don't. That was the moment I stopped being his son and started being a problem, dot now, comma, standing in that empty room. I felt the weight of that moment again, but it was different, softer somehow. I wasn't that kid anymore, and he wasn't that man. Time had changed us both, worn us down in different ways. I wondered what he'd say now, if he knew I'd made it, not as a rock star, but as something better, someone who'd built a life on his own terms. I left the house and drove to a coffee shop nearby, one of those places with mismatched chairs and baristas who looked like they were auditioning for a band. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window watching the world go by. Mothers pushing strollers, old men reading newspapers, kids laughing as they ran across the street. I thought about my parents again, about what Ava had said. Let it breathe. Maybe that meant letting myself feel the hurt, not as a weapon, but as a part of me, like the tattoos on my arms or the calluses on my fingers from years of playing guitar. My phone buzzed, a text from Miles. Asterisk, you free tonight? Got a band you need to hear? I smiled, typing back a quick asterisk. Yeah, send me the details. Work was my anchor, my way of keeping the world steady when everything else felt like it was spinning. But as I sipped my coffee, I realized something else was anchoring me too. The people who'd chosen to stay, who'd seen me at my worst and still stuck around. That night, I met Miles at a dive bar downtown, the kind of place where the air smelled of beer and sweat, and the stage was barely big enough for a drum kit. The band was raw, unpolished, but there was something there, a spark that made me lean forward, my elbows on the sticky table, listening like it was the first time I'd ever heard music. Miles was grinning, his eyes lit up, and for a moment, I forgot about the house, the door, the past. I was just Lucas, doing what I loved, surrounded by people who got it later, comma, as we walked to our cars, the city humming around us. Miles clapped a hand on my shoulder. You're good, man, he said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded, the night air cool against my skin. Yeah, I said, I'm good. And I was. Not perfect, not healed, but good. The hurt was still there, but it wasn't the only thing. There was Ava's laugh, Miles's loyalty, the music that had saved me over and over again. There was the life I'd built, brick by brick, from the ashes of a dream my parents couldn't see. As I drove home and the city lights blurring past, I thought about the house again, but not with anger or sadness. I thought about what it meant to own it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that I'd survived, that I'd thrived, that I didn't need their approval to be whole. And for the first time, I felt something like peace. The peace I felt that night didn't erase the past, but it softened its edges, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't had in weeks, the kind that comes when you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down, even if just for a moment. Ava was already up, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her sketch pad, her pencil moving in quick, sure strokes. The morning light spilled through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, making the room feel alive. I leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment. The way her brow furrowed when she was deep in thought, the way her lips curved just slightly when she liked what she'd drawn. You're staring, she said without looking up, her voice warm with amusement. Can't help it, I said, crossing the room to sit beside her. I glanced at her sketchpad, a rough outline of a vinyl record, vines curling around it, the kind of design that could make a band's album cover unforgettable. That's good, she shrugged, but her smile grew. It's a start. She set the pad down and turned to me, her eyes searching. You seem lighter today. I nodded, leaning back against the couch, my hands resting on my knees. I think I am. Not all the way, but enough. She didn't push, didn't ask for more. That was one of the things I loved about Ava. She knew when to let things be, when to trust that I'd find my way. Instead, she reached for my hand, her fingers weaving through mine, and we sat there in the quiet, the city waking up outside our windows. Work called me back soon enough. Miles and I had a big meeting with a band from Savannah, a group of kids barely out of their teens with raw talent and big dreams. They reminded me of myself at that age, all fire and defiance, certain the world was theirs if they could just get someone to listen. We spent hours in the studio, tweaking their sound, arguing over lyrics, laughing when one of them spilled coffee on the mixing board. It was messy, chaotic, perfect. This was why I'd fought so hard, why I'd kept going even when the world felt like it was against me. To be here, in this moment, helping someone else's dream take shape. But even as I threw myself into work, the old house lingered in the back of my mind. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Part of me wanted to tear it down, let the land sit empty, a blank slate where the past couldn't touch me. Another part wanted to fix it up, not to live in, but to make it something new, something that wasn't tainted by memory. I didn't tell Ava or Miles about these thoughts, not because I didn't trust them, but because I needed to figure it out myself. First dot one afternoon, I got a call from the realtor who'd handled the sale. Her voice was brisk, professional, but there was a hesitation in it that made me sit up straighter. Mr. Reed, I wasn't sure if I should mention this, but someone reached out about the property. They wanted to know if you'd be open to selling. I frowned, my fingers tightening around the phone. Who was it? She paused, then said, they didn't leave a name, just said they used to live there and had some sentimental attachment. I told them I'd pass it along. My stomach twisted, a mix of suspicion and something I couldn't name. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the phone like it might give me answers. It didn't take a genius to guess who it was. My parents, or someone acting for them, trying to claw their way back into a piece of their past. I didn't call the realtor back. I didn't need to. The house wasn't for sale, not to them, not to anyone. It was mine, and for now, that was enough. That evening, I took Ava out to dinner, a little Italian place in Midtown with candles on the tables, and wine that cost more than my first guitar. We didn't talk about the house or the call, just laughed over stories from her latest client meeting and my disastrous attempt to cook breakfast last week. But as we walked back to the car, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, she slipped her arm through mine and said, you're gonna figure it out, the house, whatever it means to you. I looked down at her, the streetlights catching the gold in her eyes. How do you know? Because you always do, she said simply, and the certainty in her voice made my chest ache in a good way. The next day, I went back to the house. I didn't plan it, it just happened, like my truck knew where to go before I did. The air was cooler now, the first hint of fall creeping in, and the leaves in the yard were starting to turn. I walked through the rooms again, slower this time, letting the memories come without fighting them. In the living room, I saw my mother's face, not the tight-lipped version from my teenage years, but the softer one from when I was little, when she'd hum old hymns while folding laundry. In the backyard, I remembered my father teaching me to throw a baseball, his laugh rare but warm, a sound I hadn't heard in decades. As I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on the counter where I'd once eaten cereal before school, a memory hit me. A small one, but vivid. I was maybe 7, sitting at this counter, my legs swinging while my mother made pancakes. The radio was on, some old country song, and she'd started singing along, her voice soft and a little off key. I'd laughed, and she'd turned to me, smiling. A real smile. Not the guarded one she'd wear later. You've got music in you, Lucas, she'd said, tapping my chest with a flour-dusted finger. Don't ever lose it. I hadn't thought about that moment in years, maybe because it hurt too much to reconcile with the woman who'd later tell me music was a waste. But standing there, I let myself feel it. The warmth of that memory. The sting of what came after. Ava was right. I had to let it breathe. I left the house with a strange sense of calm, like I'd left something behind. Not in a bad way, but like shedding a skin that didn't fit anymore. When I got home, I found a note from Ava on the counter. Asterisk, gone to the studio to finish a design. Leftovers in the fridge. Love you. I smiled, the simplicity of it grounding me. This was my life now, love, work, people who stayed. The past was still there, but it wasn't the only story. That night, I sat on the porch with my guitar, something I hadn't done in a while. The city sparkled below, alive and restless. And I played softly, not for anyone else, just for me. The chords were simple, the kind I'd played as a kid. And as my fingers moved, I felt that kid again. Not the scared one, but the one who'd believed in something bigger. I didn't need to open that door to my parents. I didn't need their approval or their regret. I had this life, this music, this moment. And it was enough, Dot. The days started to blur together the way they do when life settles into a rhythm that's both comforting and relentless. Work was a whirlwind. New bands, new contracts, late night sessions that left me bleary eyed but buzzing with the kind of energy only music could give me. Miles was pushing to expand, talking about opening a second studio in Nashville, and I was caught up in the logistics, the numbers, the dreams that felt so close I could taste them. But even in the chaos, there were moments of quiet, moments where the world slowed down and I could feel the weight of everything I'd been carrying shift just a little dot. One of those moments came on a Sunday morning when Ava and I drove out to the countryside, just the two of us, no phones, no plans. The air was crisp, the trees blazing with early fall colors, reds and golds that made the world feel like it was on fire in the best way. We ended up at a small orchard, the kind of place where families brought their kids to pick apples and to drink cider. That was too sweet, but perfect anyway. Ava laughed as she reached for an apple just out of her reach, her hair catching the sunlight, and I stood there, watching her, my heart so full it almost hurt. "You're gonna help or just stand there looking pretty?" she teased, tossing an apple at me. I caught it, grinning, and joined her, filling a basket with apples we'd probably never eat. It was the kind of day that felt like a gift, the kind you tuck away in your memory for when the world gets heavy again. As we sat on a hay bale, sharing a cup of cider, I found myself thinking about my parents. Not with anger, but with a kind of distant curiosity. What were they doing now? Where had they gone after I didn't open that door? Part of me wanted to know, not because I needed to fix anything, but because they were still a piece of my story, whether I liked it or not. Ava must have sensed the shift in my mood, because she set the cider down and looked at me, her eyes soft but steady. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, rolling the apple in my hands, feeling its smooth weight. "Just thinking about them. My parents, wondering what happened to them." She nodded, not surprised, not pushing. "Do you want to find out?" I didn't answer right away. The question hung there, heavy but not oppressive, like a cloud that might pass if you gave it time. Did I want to know? Part of me did. The part that still remembered my mother's smile over pancakes, my father's laugh in the backyard, but another part, the part that had slept in gas station bathrooms and eaten cold pizza on Christmas, wanted to let them stay in the past where they couldn't hurt me anymore. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice low. "Maybe, but not today." She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine, and that was enough. We drove back to the city as the sun dipped low, the skies streaked with pink and orange, and I felt a little lighter, like I'd left some of that weight behind in the orchard dot back in Atlanta. Life kept moving. Miles and I signed the Savannah Band, and their first single started getting traction. The kind of buzz that made you feel like you were part of something bigger. I threw myself into it, spending long hours in the studio, tweaking mixes, arguing with the band's lead singer about tempo, until we were both laughing, too tired to care. It was good, grounding, a reminder that this was my world now, not the one I'd left behind. Dot. But the house was still there, a quiet presence in the back of my mind. I hadn't been back since that day in the kitchen, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I found myself driving there, the city fading into the suburbs, the streets growing quieter, more familiar. The house looked the same, still empty, still worn, but there was something different about it now. Maybe it was the way the moonlight hit the windows, or maybe it was just me, seeing it through new eyes. I didn't go inside this time. I just sat in the driveway, the engine off, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought about the realtor's call, about the sentimental attachment whoever it was had claimed. I thought about my parents, about the way they'd looked through the peephole, small, fragile, not the giants I'd once feared. And I thought about myself, the kid who'd stood in the same driveway, scared but stubborn, refusing to let go of his dreams. A memory flickered, one I hadn't touched in years. I was 12, maybe 13, sitting in the garage with my father's old radio, the one he kept for football games. It was late, the neighborhood asleep, and I'd found a station playing blues, raw, aching music that hit me like a punch. I'd sat there for hours, the sound filling the dark, making me feel like I wasn't alone. When my father found me, he didn't yell. He just stood there, listening for a moment, then said, That's real music, Lucas, don't forget it. It was one of the only times I felt like he saw me, really saw me. Not as a disappointment, but as his son, dot now, comma, sitting in the driveway. I wondered if he'd meant it, or if it was just a moment, fleeting and gone. I wondered if he'd ever think of me now, if he'd heard my name somewhere, seen my company's logo on a record. I wondered if he regretted anything, or if he was still too proud to admit he'd been wrong. I started the truck and drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. When I got home, Ava was waiting, curled up on the couch with a book, the lamp casting a soft glow over her. She looked up as I came in, her smile small, but real. You okay? She asked, setting the book down. Yeah, I said, and this time I meant it. I sat beside her, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her against me. I'm okay. The next morning, I made a decision. I called the contractor and told him to start renovations, not to sell the house, not to live in it, but to make it something new. A community space, maybe, for kids like I'd been. Kids with dreams their families didn't understand. A place where they could play music, write songs, feel like they belonged. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a way of taking the past and making it mean something else. Dot. When I told Ava, her eyes lit up and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. That's perfect, she whispered. And I felt it too, the rightness of it. The way it closed a circle without erasing the lines. Miles was all in too, already talking about soundproofing and stage setups, his enthusiasm infectious. As we sat in the studio later that week, listening to the Savannah Band's latest track, I looked around at the equipment, the posters, the coffee cups scattered on the table, and felt a quiet pride. This was my life, not the one my parents had planned, but the one I'd chosen. And it was enough. Dot. The decision to turn the house into a community space felt like a weight lifting, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was more like turning a page, starting a new chapter that carried echoes of the old one. The contractor got to work, sending me updates about drywall and wiring, things I barely understood but nodded along to anyway. Miles was in his element, sketching out plans for a small stage in what used to be the living room, talking about sound systems and open mic nights like it was already real. Ava, meanwhile, was designing a logo for the space. Something simple, a guitar with roots curling around it, like music growing out of the ground. Every time I saw her working on it, her pencil scratching softly, I felt a surge of gratitude that she was here, that she was part of this. Dot. But even as the house started to transform, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. It wasn't about my parents, not exactly, but about me, about the part of me that still wondered what might have happened if I'd opened that door. I didn't regret my choice, but I couldn't help imagining their faces, the way they must have stood there waiting, hoping, only to hear nothing but silence. It wasn't guilt, not really, but a kind of quiet ache, like a bruise that only hurts when you press it. Dot. One morning, as I was pouring coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart gave a strange lurch, the kind that comes when you know something's about to shift. The message was short. Asterisk Lucas, it's Marla. I got your number from a friend. Can we talk? Please. Dot asterisk. I set the phone down, my hands shaking slightly. Marla. My mother? After all these years, after that day at the door, she was reaching out. I didn't know how she'd gotten my number, and part of me wanted to delete the message, pretend it never existed. But another part, the part that had sat in the orchard with Ava, wondering what had happened to them, couldn't let it go. I didn't respond right away. I shoved the phone in my pocket and went about my day, meeting Miles at the studio, listening to a new demo, arguing about whether the bass needed more punch. But the message was there, a weight in my pocket, pulling at my thoughts. By the time I got home, the sun dipping low over the city, I knew I had to tell Ava. Dot. She was in the living room, her sketch pad open, the logo for the community space taking shape. I sat across from her, the words stuck in my throat until she looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's wrong? She asked, setting her pencil down. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text. Her lips pressed together as she read it, her fingers brushing mine as she handed it back. What do you want to do? She asked, her voice soft, like she was holding space for whatever I needed to say. I don't know, I admitted, leaning back, my hands running through my hair. Part of me wants to ignore it. But I don't know, Ava. I keep thinking about what you said. About letting it breathe. She nodded, her eyes steady. You don't have to decide now, but If you do talk to her, it's not about them, it's about you, what you need to move forward. I didn't answer, just sat there, the silence stretching between us. That night, I lay awake, Ava's breathing soft beside me, and thought about my mother's text. I thought about the pancakes, the hymns, the way she'd once believed in my music before she didn't. I thought about the man I'd become, the life I'd built, and whether I could face her without losing myself. The next day, I texted back, asterisk, what do you want to talk about? It was short, guarded, but it was something. She responded almost immediately, asterisk, can we meet somewhere neutral? Just to talk. Asterisk, I agreed, though my stomach churned at the thought. We set a time, a coffee shop near the studio, one of those places with too many plants and overpriced lattes. When the day came, I arrived early, my hands wrapped around a mug I barely drank from, my eyes on the door. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was gray, her face thinner, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying something heavy. She saw me and hesitated, then walked over, sitting across from me without a word. You look good, Lucas, she said finally, her voice small, like she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. I noticed her hands, worn, the nails chipped. No trace of the manicure she used to pride herself on. The silence stretched, heavy until she spoke again. I know you don't owe me anything, she said, her eyes on the table. I know what we did. What I did was wrong. I've spent years regretting it, but that doesn't change anything, does it? I swallowed, my throat tight. Why now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Why after all this time? She looked up, her eyes wet but not spilling over. We lost everything. The house, the savings, everything. But it's not about that. It's about you. I saw your name in a magazine, saw what you've done, and I realized we lost you, and it was our fault. I sat there, the words sinking in, each one a small cut. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her it was too late, that her regret didn't undo the nights I'd spent alone, the years I'd built myself from nothing. But another part, the part that had bought the house, that had turned it into something new, wanted to understand. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice low. I don't know if I want to, but I'm here. That's something. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It's more than I deserve. We talked for a while, not about forgiveness, but about small things. Her health, my work, the way the neighborhood had changed. It wasn't reconciliation, not even close, but it was a crack in the wall I'd built, a place where light could get through. When we parted, she hugged me and I let her, though my arms were stiff. Unsure. Driving home, I felt raw, like I'd been scraped clean, but there was a strange relief in it. I told Ava everything, and she listened, her hand in mine, her silence a kind of strength. You did good, she said when I finished, and I believed her. The community space opened a few months later, a small crowd of kids and locals filling the rooms that had once held my pain. I watched them play guitars, sing songs, laugh, and felt something settle in me. A quiet victory, not over my parents, but over the past. I didn't need their approval, their regret, or their love. I had this, my life, my people, my music. And as I stood in the doorway, watching a kid strum a chord I'd once played, I knew I was free. The opening of the community space was like a deep breath after holding it too long. The house didn't feel like mine anymore, not in the way it had when I'd bought it, heavy with ghosts and grudges. Now it was alive, filled with the hum of guitars, the chatter of kids, the scuff of sneakers on the polished floors. I'd walk through the rooms sometimes, watching a teenager hunched over a notebook, scribbling lyrics, or a group of kids laughing as they tried to sync their chords, and I'd feel this quiet pride. Not just for what I'd done, but for what it meant. This place was a second chance. Not for me, but for them. Kids who needed somewhere to belong, the way I had when I was their age. Miles was there almost every day, setting up workshops, booking local bands for open mic nights, his energy contagious. He'd always been the one to dream big, to see possibilities where I saw obstacles. And watching him in that space, joking with the kids, tweaking the sound system, I realized how much I owed him. Not just for the business, but for the years he'd stuck by me, through the lean times, the doubts, the moments when I wasn't sure I could keep going. Ava was there too. her logo painted on the wall, her presence a steady warmth that made the place feel like home in a way the house never had when I was a kid. But even with the space thriving, my mother's visit lingered in my mind, like a song you can't quite shake. Meeting her at the coffee shop hadn't closed the wound, but it had changed it, made it less raw, more like a scar you notice but don't flinch from. I didn't hear from her again after that day, and I didn't reach out. Part of me wondered if I should, if there was more to say. But another part, the part that had spent years building a life without her, knew I didn't need to. That meeting had been for me, not her, a way to face the past without letting it own me. One evening, as I was locking up the community space, a kid named Jaden stopped me. He was maybe 16, all lanky limbs and quiet intensity, the kind of kid who carried his guitar like it was part of him. He'd been coming to the space since it opened, always in the back, playing soft chords, never performing, but always listening. "Hey, Lucas," he said, his voice hesitant, like he wasn't sure he should be talking to me. "Can I ask you something?" I leaned against the door frame, the night air cool against my skin. "Sure, what's up?" He shifted, his eyes on the ground. How do you how do you keep going when nobody believes in you, like your family or whatever?" The question hit me like a punch, not because it was new, but because it was so familiar. I saw myself in him, that kid in the driveway, scared but stubborn, clinging to a dream nobody else could see. I thought about lying, giving him some easy answer, but he deserved better. "It's hard," I said finally, my voice low. "There were days I didn't think I could, but you find people who do believe in you, friends, mentors, even strangers sometimes. And you hold on to that. You hold on to the music too, because it's yours, no matter what anyone says." He nodded, his jaw tight, like he was swallowing something heavy. "My dad thinks I'm wasting my time. Says I should be studying for college, not messing around with a guitar." I felt a pang, sharp and old. Mine said the same thing. "Kicked me out when I was 18 because I wouldn't give it up." His eyes widened like he couldn't imagine it. "What'd you do?" "Kept going," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Found people who got it. Built something. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, like he was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then he nodded, a small, determined movement. "Thanks, man." As he walked away, his guitar case slung over his shoulder, I felt something shift in me, a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. Helping kids like Jaden, giving them a place to be themselves. That was the real victory, not the house, not the silence at the door. It was about breaking the cycle, making sure they didn't have to carry the same weight I had. When I got home, Ava was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili, the smell filling the air with warmth. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile soft. "How's the space?" "Good," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "Talked to a kid tonight. Reminded me of me." She turned, her eyes curious. "Yeah?" "Yeah," I said, leaning against the counter. "Made me realize this is bigger than me. Bigger than the past." She stepped closer, her hand resting on my chest, right over my heart. "That's why you did it," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "You're giving them what you didn't have." I pulled her into my arms, feeling the truth of her words settle into me. She was right. The community space wasn't just a way to rewrite the house's story, it was a way to rewrite mine. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The space started getting attention, local papers writing about it, kids spreading the word on social media. Miles was thrilled, already planning a big showcase for the spring, talking about inviting scouts from record labels. I was caught up in it, but there were moments when I'd pause, watching the kids, and feel a quiet gratitude for how far I'd come. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. My hands stilled as I opened it, recognizing the careful, slanted writing before I even saw the signature. It was from my father. The words were simple, almost formal, like he'd spent hours choosing them. Asterisk Lucas, I'm proud of what you've done. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Asterisk. I sat there, the letter in my hands, the words blurring as my eyes burned. Proud. Sorry. Words I'd wanted for so long, words I'd stopped expecting. But now that they were here, they didn't feel like the victory I'd imagined. They felt small, not because they weren't sincere, but because I didn't need them anymore. I'd built my life without them. And while the apology mattered, it didn't change who I was. I showed the letter to Ava that night, and she read it silently, her fingers tracing the words. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. What do you feel? She asked. I took a deep breath, the air steadying me. I'm glad he wrote it, but I'm okay without it too. She smiled, a bittersweet curve of her lips, and leaned against me. You are. The letter stayed on my desk for a few days, a quiet presence, until I tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't write back, not yet. Maybe not ever. But I carried it with me, not as a weight, but as a reminder that I'd made it, not because of them, but in spite of them. And as I stood in the community space the next week, watching Jaden take the stage for the first time, his fingers steady on the strings, I knew I'd found my peace. Not in revenge or regret, but in the life I'd chosen, the one that was mine. Jaden's chords echoed in the community space, raw and unsteady at first, but growing stronger with each note. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, watching him pour himself into the music. His eyes half closed, his fingers finding their way like they'd been waiting for this moment. The room was small, just a handful of kids and a few locals scattered on folding chairs, but it felt full, alive with the kind of energy that only comes when someone's telling their truth. I felt a lump in my throat, not because of the song itself, but because I knew what it cost him to be up there, to stand in front of people who might not understand. I'd been that kid once, scared but stubborn, playing for anyone who'd listen, hoping it was enough dot A's. Jaden finished, the room erupted in claps and whistles, and his face broke into a shy grin. The kind that said he hadn't expected it to feel this good. I caught his eye and gave him a nod, the kind I used to crave from someone, anyone, when I was his age. He nodded back, then ducked his head, slinging his guitar over his shoulder as he stepped off the stage. I turned away, my chest tight, and slipped outside, needing the cool night air to steady me. The stars were sharp above the old house, the neighborhood quiet except for the faint hum of traffic in the distance. I leaned against the porch railing, my hands gripping the wood, and let myself feel it. The weight of the past, the lightness of now dot. That moment with Jaden had done something to me, cracked open a part of me I'd kept locked away. I'd spent so long proving I didn't need my parents, proving I could make it without them, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be, to stand in a moment and let it be enough. The letter from my father was still in that drawer, its words etched in my mind. Proud, sorry, wrong. But they didn't define me anymore. Neither did my mother's tearful voice in that coffee shop, or the silence I'd chosen when they'd knocked on the door. I'd built something bigger than all of that, not just the community space, but a life that was mine, scars and all, dot. The next morning, I woke early, the city still asleep outside our windows. Ava was curled up beside me, her breathing soft, her hair spilling across the pillow like a dark river. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made coffee, the machine's gurgle of familiar comfort. As I stood in the kitchen, mug in hand, I thought about my parents again, but not with the old anger or ache. I wondered where they were, what their days looked like now. My mother had said they'd lost everything, house, savings, maybe more, but I didn't know the details, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. Their fall wasn't my victory. It was just their story, separate from mine. I'd heard through a neighbor, weeks after the coffee shop meeting, that they were living in a small apartment on the other side of town, scraping by on what little they had left. The neighbor didn't know much, just that my father had lost his job years ago, that my mother's health wasn't good, that they'd burned bridges with most of their old friends. It wasn't dramatic, not like some big public shaming, but it was real. A quiet, grinding kind of consequence, the kind that comes when you hold too tightly to pride, when you push away the people who matter. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing it, not the way I might have years ago. I just felt distant, like I was looking at a picture of someone else's life. I took my coffee to the porch, the air crisp with the promise of winter. The city skyline glittered below, all sharp edges and ambition, a reminder of how far I'd come. I thought about the kid I'd been, standing in that driveway with a backpack and a guitar, scared but too stubborn to give up. I thought about the nights I'd spent in borrowed cars, the mornings I'd woken up hungry, the songs I'd written to keep myself going. I thought about Miles, who'd shared his last dollar with me in that shelter, and Ava, who'd seen me at my worst and loved me anyway. They were my family now, not by blood, but by choice, and that was worth more than any apology my parents could offer, dot. Later that day, I drove to the community space, the house looking brighter now with its fresh paint and new windows. Miles was inside, setting up for a workshop. his laugh booming as he teased one of the kids about a missed chord. I joined them, helping tune guitars, listening to their stories. Small, ordinary stories about school, parents, dreams that felt too big for their lives. I didn't talk much, just listened, but it felt right. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As the workshop wrapped up, I pulled Miles aside, leaning against the wall where Ava's logo was painted, bold and alive. You ever think about where we'd be if we hadn't met? I asked, my voice low, almost lost in the hum of the room. He grinned, rubbing his jaw, probably still hustling for change on Peachtree Street. You? I laughed, but it was soft, thoughtful. I don't know, not here though, not like this. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. We did all right, man. Better than all right, I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into me. We had done all right. Better than I'd ever dared to hope back when I was sleeping in gas stations, dreaming of a life that felt impossible. This space, these kids, this life. It was my answer to the past, not a shout, but a steady, quiet truth. That evening, I took Ava to the park, the same one where we'd watched the sunset months ago. The air cooler now, the leaves crunching under our boots. We walked in silence for a while, her hand in mine and the city lights flickering in the distance. I told her about the neighbor's news, about my parents' quiet fall, and she listened, her thumb brushing over my knuckles, grounding me. Do you feel anything? She asked, her voice soft, not pushing, just curious. I thought about it, really thought about it, letting the question sit. I feel sorry for them, I guess. Not pity, just sad that it turned out this way, but it's not my weight to carry anymore. She nodded, her eyes warm, like she'd known I'd get there. You've changed, not just from when we met, but from a few months ago. You're freer. I stopped walking, turning to face her, the moonlight catching the gold in her eyes. You think so? I know so, she said, her smile small but certain. You're not fighting the past anymore, you're living. Her words hit me, not like a wave, but like a tide, slow and deep, pulling me into a truth I hadn't named. She was right. I wasn't the kid in the driveway, or the man who'd stood behind that door, silent and cold. I was someone new, someone who'd learned to let the hurt breathe, to let it be part of me without being all of me. I pulled her close, her warmth steady against the chill, and kissed her forehead, feeling the world settle into place. The months that followed were full, not just with work, but with life. The community space grew, drawing more kids, more artists, even a few parents who'd started to see their kids' dreams differently. Jaden's band got a small gig at a local bar, and I was there, cheering louder than anyone, my heart full as I watched him shine. Miles and I broke ground on the Nashville studio, a new dream taking shape, and Ava's designs started getting noticed, her name popping up in magazines alongside mine. I didn't hear from my parents again, and I didn't seek them out. Their story was theirs, and I wished them no harm, but I didn't need to be part of it. The community space was my closure, my way of turning pain into purpose, of giving back what I'd never had. I'd walk through those rooms sometimes, late at night when it was quiet, and feel the echoes of my younger self, not haunting, but at peace, like he'd finally found his way home. One evening, as the first snow dusted the city, I sat on the porch of our house, my guitar in my lap, the strings cold under my fingers. Ava was inside, sketching, the light from the window spilling out like a promise. I played softly, a melody I'd been working on, simple but true, the kind of song that didn't need words to say something. The city sparkled below, alive and restless, and I thought about the road I'd traveled, the cracked driveway, the empty nights, the dreams that had carried me through. I didn't need to open that door to know I was whole. I didn't need my parents' pride or their regret. I had this, my music, my love, my life. And as the last note faded into the night, I set the guitar down, my breath visible in the cold, and smiled. The stars above were enough.